Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are we doing today? Good to see so many smiling faces. Yes, Steve.
The Cardinals have won 6 in a row.
Fabulous, Steve.
How many have the Cubs been winning? Oh, it's not one yet. We don't win.
Plenty. Enough for Cub fans. As I was telling the people last night, today is our last day looking at the 10 Commandments as part of our summer sermon series because the end of summer is near. Start of school is on Wednesday, and through the month of, so next week we will be looking at the pericopes, the readings for the day for church on Sunday. And that will take us through August until we get going on our Bible study for September and then October, potentially. We still have to put some work into that, but I've been currently putting together stuff for 7th and 8th grade religion class, and that's been taking up most of my time. But that will be done tomorrow, and I can start in on what we're going to be covering on in September. But for the next, I think, what do we have? 3 Sundays left in August after today? Is that about? Because this is the first Sunday in August. That makes sense, right, everybody? So we'll be looking at starting, so we'll be looking at the readings for Sunday and then starting up a new Bible study in September. That's my goal. All right. We are looking at the 9th and the 10th commandments. And the first question, or the first thing for us to discuss today is, what is the difference between these 3 words? Stealing, cheating, and coveting. Talk at your table. I'll give you some time. Discuss amongst yourselves. And get back.
Anyway, you're talking about children's needs to see and to take from. And that was really important. You could run that by as a kid.
That was last night, yes.
Well, I you might steal.
Help me remember when I later where and when I said such things.
I was in grade school. I had been sick, so I had to go in.
It was good. That's her.
No, but those questions, the answers were there. Well, when I was back in the room, I realized that when I turned the page, the sun was coming through. I got an 8 on that test. That was cheating, wasn't it? Why did I get so? I think I left one wrong just so it didn't look obvious.
Stealing, cheating, and coveting. What are the differences between the 3? So, what is stealing?
Taking something that doesn't belong to you.
Taking something that doesn't belong to you. Okay. Other things about stealing? No, pretty good with that definition.
I was thinking sometimes it's not a thing, but it might be like time. It might not be a tangible object.
Anything.
Yes, I agree.
Cheating. For cheating, yes.
Doing less for more?
Doing less for more.
Dishonest gain.
Dishonest gain, doing less for more.
Think of temptation that is given into. I don't know.
Temptation given into. And then there's coveting. Is when we read through the 9th and 10th commandments, we have to figure out how they are different from the others. So they are, the 9th and 10th commandments are, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his cattle, or anything that is his. Within that commandment, we find stealing and cheating. Because if you're taking something from someone else, that's stealing. If you're taking your neighbor's wife, that's cheating. And we've already dealt with those commandments, right? That's what the stealing is for the 7th. Cheating is for the 6th. Are you the 8th as well? So then why does God give us coveting?
Coveting leads to stealing and cheating.
It does.
Can't hear you, Kate.
What did you say?
I said sometimes coveting is like it's an inward thing. You desire it, but you don't necessarily act on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in your heart, it's in your head.
And I think the world often looks at it as, well, I didn't really take it, so there was nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it is wrong when we desire those things, like Kate's saying.
Yeah, word and deed.
So Luther lets us know a little bit of the history behind this. And if you just look at that first page on 72, we get a little bit of an idea of why God gives us this at this 9th and 10th commandment, if he's already addressed it in the 7th and the 6th. And he says, these 2 commandments are given quite exclusively to the Jewish people. Nevertheless, in part, they also apply to us. So we're not off the hook, just because they were written more towards the Jewish people. For they do not interpret them as referring to unchastity or theft. These are forbidden well enough above. They also thought that they had kept all those commands when they had done or not done the external act. So the Jews thought that they were keeping the 7th and the 6th by not doing the external act. They didn't have Jesus to tell us in his Sermon on the Mount that if we do this in our heart, then we are breaking them. And so God gives them then the 9th and the 10th. They also thought, okay, so it's in starting off, therefore, God, and this is what I have underlined in mine, therefore God has added these 2 commandments in order that it be considered sinful and forbidden to desire or in any way to aim at getting our neighbor's wife or possessions. He added them especially because under Jewish government, manservants and maidservants were not free, as they are now, to serve for wages as long as they pleased. Jewish servants were their master's property with their body and all they had, as were cattle and other possessions. Further, every man had power over his wife to put her away publicly by giving her a bill of divorce and to take another. For therefore they were in constant danger among each other. If one took a fancy to another's wife, he might declare any reason both to dismiss his own wife and to estrange his neighbor's wife from him, so that he might get her in a way that appeared right, that was not considered a sin or a disgrace among them, just as it is hardly considered a sin now with hired help when an owner dismisses his manservant or maidservant or takes another servant from him in any way. We may see that today as one business getting someone else's employees, instead of helping our neighbor keep his workers. We find ways to try and attract them to our place of business.
It takes away from our thankfulness for what we got.
It does. So that brings us down to the bottom of 73. It says, this commandment, starting at 300, this last commandment therefore is given not for cheaters in the eyes of the world, it is for the most pious, who want to be praised and to be called honest and upright people. For they have not offended against the former commandments, 7 and 6, cheating. For they have not offended against the former commandments, as especially the Jewish people claim to live and are even now many great noblemen, gentlemen, and princes. So I hope you've been able to see through reading this large catechism, Luther doesn't really care who you are. He will take you to task. No matter who you are, what your status is. And here he is even taking the great noblemen, gentlemen, and princes, and even us to task. For the other common masses belong yet further down under the 7th commandment, as people who are, as I have this underlined, as people who are hardly concerned about whether they gain their possessions with honor and right. So what Luther is saying is that God has given the 7th and the 6th for those who don't care if they have honor when they are caught stealing or in the act of adultery. That's what those commandments are for. Those are the specific you shall nots. And then Luther is then telling us God gives us the 9th and 10th for those who want to have honor, but yet are stealing and cheating. Those 2 darn words, appears right. So I would say a good definition to coveting are those 2 words. Coveting is what appears right. Have you ever thought of coveting in that way? In those regards to those 2 words. Appears right.
Yeah, you always want to make yourself look good. mean, everybody does, naturally.
Yeah. We see something that our neighbor has, and we cannot be happy for him. As Luther says there at 297 on 73, 297. That one's even in the sermon today, that first sentence there. Do you agree with Luther? 297, page 73. For our natural instinct is that no one wants to see someone else have as much as himself. Unfortunately, coveting is a big part of the American U.S. economy and marketing and advertising. Yeah, you deserve it. It's like you really needed a pocket fisherman, but yet you had one in your car and never used it. Because you might have been stranded alongside the side of the road somewhere and needed a pocket fisherman. Who remembers the pocket fisherman? One of the greatest inventions of Ronco history. It's the invention that started it all. So, that is the basis of our economy, this idea of the, oh look, you deserve this. Oh look, has this. I mean, we even have an expression for it in our culture, and it's called, does anyone remember? What's it called? It's called
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yes! Keeping up with the Joneses. The grass is greener on the other side. Just don't be fooled, because in California it just may be painted that color. And that's the thing, is that is a really good analogy, because that means we also are guilty of keeping up with facades, painting the grass so that it looks greener, so that it can look like we have more than what our neighbor has. So that really gets at the idea of the word coveting and what appears right. So then, how does this commandment speak most directly to pious people? What is the word pious? Can we get a definition of that? Pious? I have to erase that, but I don't want to. Pious.
I would say appearing holy.
Appearing holy. Others? Pious.
Good through and through, maybe, for a dictionary definition. Upright. Making all the right choices.
Here's one. Moral.
God never uses that word, I'm just thinking, in his word, he never uses it in a good way. It's usually like the hypocrites and never in a good light.
Pious is that, if Luther's ever talking about piety, he says you're full of something. And his goal is for us never to be pious, this idea of appearing holy that you're good through and through, making all the right choices, that your morals are above others. Luther says you're just a hypocrite. Instead, all Luther ever wants us to realize is that we are by nature sinful and unclean, and in need of a Savior. And that we are always in need of continually asking God for forgiveness, recognizing the depravity of our fallen state, of our sinful nature.
I had a boss one time that talked a lot about working smart, and really, it was the other way for him. But he talked about how smart he was.
Working smart. Yeah. Look to the top of page 75. (307). In whatever way such things happen, we must know that God does not want you to deprive your neighbor of anything that belongs to him, so that he suffer the loss and you gratify your greed with it. This is true even if you could keep it honorably before the world. For it is a secret and sly trick done under the hat, as we say, so it may not be noticed. Although you go your way as if you had done no one any wrong, you have still injured your neighbor. If it is not called stealing and cheating, it is still called coveting your neighbor's property. That is, aiming at possession of it, luring it away from him without his consent, and being unwilling to see him enjoy what God has granted him. Even though the judge and everyone must let you keep it, God will not let you keep it. For he sees the deceitful heart and the world's malice, which is sure to take an extra long measure. Wherever you yield to her a finger's breadth, eventually public wrong and violence follow. So in our day and age, what Luther there is talking about is the practice of, let's say a nobleman is in financial trouble, and he goes to a businessman for a loan. And the businessman wants either his title, by having his property, would then have his title. And so the businessman makes the loan, but he makes it for outrageous interest payments, or his whole goal is to undermine the nobleman to the point that in the end, he will get everything. That is coveting. That is breaking the 9th and 10th commandment. That may play out in our society today where wills and trusts are concerned. We should always be cautious and keep the 9th and 10th commandment in mind when putting together wills and trusts and so forth. And judging everything against what God's word has to say to us.
During the Depression, that happened. I know a particular elevator would loan money to some farmers that they knew couldn't pay, and then they just take their land.
Yeah. So, continuing on at 309, this last paragraph. Therefore, we allow these commandments to remain in their ordinary meaning. It is commanded first that we do not desire our neighbor's harm, nor even assist, nor give opportunity for it. But we must gladly wish and leave him what he has. Also, we must advance and preserve for him what may be for his profit and service, just as we wish to be treated. Can you think of an example of someone doing that correctly in the Bible? Old Testament.
Abraham with Lot.
Abraham with Lot.
You know, you take whichever side you want, and you know.
Mm-hmm. Also, I'm thinking of Joseph? Does that necessarily keep Joseph, by following the 9th and 10th commandment, does that keep Joseph out of trouble? No. It doesn't keep Joseph out of trouble. In fact, it gets him into trouble. But in both cases of Abraham and Joseph, they trust the Lord, that even if the ground that Moses does get is the worst ground, it's not the best, and yet it doesn't matter, because if the Lord has the intent to have you thrive, it's what he will do. And so he does thrive. We see that when Joseph is given command over all Egypt, yet it's not technically his stuff. He's managing it for someone else. He is ensuring that the best happens for his employer, the Pharaoh, for the country of Egypt. That's what his concern is for. And so God blesses him in that way.
About every time there was a kinsman redeemer that would take care, like in the story of Ruth, the book of Ruth. And then we have our ultimate in Jesus Christ, who redeems lost and broken people.
Here, I would agree with you. A kinsman redeemer, with the story between Ruth and Boaz, that's a great example of living out the 9th and 10th commandment, because you had really nothing to gain from being a kinsman redeemer. In fact, you had a lot to lose, because it wasn't really to your own benefit, it was for the benefit of your dead brother, cousin, whichever. It was to his benefit, not yours. So that's a good example of living out the 9th and 10th commandment. When we see, so we have when Jacob leaves and goes and is with his uncle. What's his uncle's name? Jacob's uncle's name?
Laban.
Laban, thank you. Laban, when Jacob goes to live with Laban, Laban is breaking the 10th commandment by bickering over what goats Jacob could have, and he doesn't want any of the less desirable goats, and so Jacob's like, I'll take those, and what does God do? Only less desirable goats are born. And so the Lord takes care of us. That's what the 9th and 10th commandment is, and it gets back to what Steve says. That is what the 9th and 10th commandment is to bring us to realize, is to be thankful for what the Lord has given us, and not what he has given someone else, but to be happy and overjoyed at what the Lord has given someone else, and to be happy with what he has given you.
I guess it's a side thought, but my mind keeps going to the place where how do we help, and what did it say, preserve, and how do we help our neighbor preserve what they have? Rather than wanting what they have, how do we help them preserve?
So one way could be this. For example, you are noticing that your neighbor's property is going into disrepair for whatever reason may be. Maybe they're a little older and they can't take good care of their yard, or they don't have the finances to upkeep paint on the house. And you're like, that would be a really great investment property. This house continues in the trajectory that it is, it's going to be cheap when this guy or woman finally passes and stops living there. I can pick it up for good money. That is covenant. Instead, what the Lord calls us to is to go mow your neighbor's yard, paint his house, help him keep what he has. And that is not necessarily an easy thing to do, but that's what he calls us to do in loving our neighbor. And This is a good reminder to us, though. We tend to be very private individuals, and we don't want to be seen as taking help. But if we notice, especially when it comes to our family of faith, if we notice someone who is struggling in our church, who their house isn't in the best shape and it needs to be painted, there is nothing wrong with the church coming together and saying, can we help? And to fulfill the 9th and 10th commandment may mean taking on some embarrassment. It may mean putting us in uncomfortable positions, asking questions, with the goal and intent of helping our neighbor. Yes?
And then with our elder special use fund, we do that sometimes with that. Or not?
That is, the special use fund is more for someone who may be coming through, is not necessarily a member of our family of faith, who's needing help outside in the community. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that more the intent of that than, or is it for anything where people may need help? That's always how it's been said to me, looking at my 3 elders here. Or four elders.
People coming through.
Yeah.
And maybe in that situation where you all come together to paint somebody's house, everybody just chips in and buys the paint and gives the time so that it costs nothing to the person who needs the help.
Yeah. So that is what coveting is. It is doing something that appears right and pious. So coveting is doing what appears right and looks pious, but in reality is not right or pious, what good. And by doing that, God then kind of brings everything back full circle. He leaves us looking at both tables, 1 through 3 being our relationship with God, 4 through 8 being our relationship with our neighbor. He leaves us standing looking at all 10 commandments, and that with our relationship with God, we're not trusting Him to provide, or not being thankful for what He has given us. And on the other side, He is asked, we're not loving our neighbor because we're not helping them keep what He has given them. So hopefully through our in-depth look at the 10 Commandments this summer, you are now, well, I knew you were before, but are now been refreshed by the fact that we can't keep any of them, no matter how hard we try. We cannot keep a single commandment. We will fail at breaking every single one of them. That's why Luther has no need for piety. He only has need for sinners in need of a Savior. And that is what we are. We're commandment breakers. People who break the commandments always, because we're sinners. We can't keep them. But we then go to Jesus asking Him for forgiveness and for help in keeping them as best we can. And that is where the commandments turn from being something that we have to then what we get to do. The Christian in his freedom is then given the ability to do the commandments in service to our neighbor. That's what we get to do. We get to go ask our neighbor, hey, can I mow your yard today? We get to go and help our neighbor keep his possessions. We get to honor our parents as best we can, no matter how difficult it is. We get to stand in a real court of law or the court of public opinion and say what is true and right. and keeping the 8th commandment. As a Christian, we find that these are the 10 commandments then become things we get to do, not things we have to do for our salvation, but we get to do them because we are saved by Christ the crucified.